The frost had barely settled on the palace grounds when the servants noticed the prince was gone. Not missing in a way royalty sometimes disappears into private chambers or hidden gardens, but truly gone. His bedroom door hung open. The silk curtains billowed in the pre-dawn wind, and a trail of massive claw marks scored the marble balcony. Commander Harris received the alert while checking the night patrol reports. He was human, one of the few aliens permitted in the Dragon Royal Guard, and he had served the palace for 20 years. The other guards whispered that humans made good commanders because they worried about details that dragons considered beneath their notice. Harris proved them right by immediately checking the frost patterns on the balcony floor. The prints were fresh, maybe 3 hours old. They showed Reth had shifted into his full dragon form and launched himself east toward the colony territories. That alone was strange. The prince never flew without his escort. He never left the palace without informing someone. And he certainly never went toward human space, which the Dragon Court considered primitive and beneath their attention. "Get the squad ready," Harris told his second officer, a young dragon named Owen who still had trouble controlling his fire when nervous. "We leave in 10 minutes. Should we inform the council?" Owen asked. "Not yet. If this is what I think it is, we need to find him before they do." Owen's eyes widened with understanding. Everyone in the guard knew the prince had been different these past months. Quieter, more distant. He attended the endless ceremonies and political meetings like a prisoner serving a sentence. 3 times in the past month, someone had tried to poison him. Twice, assassins had been caught near his chambers. The palace called it politics. Harris called it torture. They followed the prince across 3 star systems. Dragon tracks were easy to spot when you knew what to look for. Scorched grass where he landed. Trees bent away from the force of his wings. Broken branches at exactly the height his tail would swing. The trail led them away from the major colonies and into the outer territories where humans built small farms and quiet lives far from the chaos of the core worlds. The tracks ended at a wooden house that IT sat alone on a hillside, surrounded by a vegetable garden that was ready for winter. Smoke curled from the chimney. Light glowed warm behind curtains that someone had sewn by hand. The door was painted blue, and a rocking chair sat empty on the porch. It was the kind of place that had no business being at the end of a dragon prince's escape route. Harris raised his fist, and the squad stopped. 6 guards in full armor, carrying weapons that could level a city block, standing in a vegetable garden and trying to figure out what to do next. "Maybe he ate whoever lived here," one guard suggested quietly. "The chimney is smoking," Harris pointed out. "Someone is home. Could be a trap." Harris studied the house. Everything about it screamed peaceful, normal, safe. It was exactly the kind of place someone running from danger would seek out, and exactly the kind of place someone exhausted by violence would collapse. "Owen, you are with me. The rest of you, form a perimeter but stay out of sight. If this goes wrong, I do not want to explain to the council why we destroyed a civilian home." They approached the door. Harris knocked, his hand nowhere near his weapon. If the prince was inside and wanted to be found, threatening whoever sheltered him would be a mistake. If the prince did not want to be found, weapons would not help anyway. The door opened before his second knock. An old human woman stood in the doorway. She was small, barely reaching Harris's chest, with white hair tied back in a simple bun and a face that had seen many years and many sorrows. She wore a plain dress with an apron over it, and flour dusted her hands. She looked at the 2 armor guards on her porch and smiled like they were neighbors stopping by for sugar. "You must be here for the boy," she said. Her voice was gentle, the kind that probably sang lullabies once. Come in. Dinner is almost ready, and I set extra plates. I figured you would arrive around this time." Harris and Owen exchanged glances. This was not how these situations usually went. "Ma'am, we are looking for Prince Reth of the Dragon Throne. His trail led us here. We need to speak with him immediately. I know who you're looking for, dear. He is in the kitchen helping me with the bread. Well, trying to help. His claws are not made for kneading dough." She stepped back and gestured them inside. "Now stop letting the cold air in and get yourselves in here. And boots off, please. I just swept." Harris stared at her. Owen's mouth hung open, a thin wisp of smoke escaping. The woman waited patiently, one hand on her hip, completely unafraid of the armed soldiers at her door. "I am Dorothy," she said, as if that explained everything. "And you boys look like you have not had a proper meal in days. Come eat first, then we can discuss whatever politics brought you chasing across the galaxy. But in my house, we eat before we argue. That is the rule." She turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open behind her. Harris heard sounds from within. Dishes clinking, a deep voice, unmistakably Reth's, asking something about oven temperature. The smell of fresh bread and soup drifted out into the cold air. Owen looked at his commander. "What do we do?" Harris sighed and started unlacing his boots. "We follow orders." The lady said boots off. 3 weeks earlier, Reth had decided he would rather die than attend another state dinner. The thought came to him while he was standing in his ceremonial robes, listening to Ambassador Krell deliver a speech about trade agreements that everyone knew was actually about military positioning. Around him, the court smiled their political smiles and played their political games, and Reth realized with sudden clarity that he could not breathe, not physically. His lungs worked fine, but something inside him was suffocating under the weight of crowns and expectations and the 300 years of life that still stretched ahead of him if he stayed. He left, he did not plan it, did not pack anything or leave a note. He simply walked to his balcony, shifted into his true form, and launched himself into the night sky. Behind him, alarms began to sound. Ahead of him lay empty space and the desperate hope that somewhere in the galaxy, there was a place where no one knew his name. He flew for 2 days straight, pushing his wings until the muscles screamed. He avoided the major trade routes and the colony cores where his face was known. He flew past the tourist stations and the mining operations and the agricultural worlds, seeking something he could not name. When he finally crashed, it was because his body simply gave out. One moment he was gliding over a small farming colony on the edge of human space, and the next his wings folded wrong and gravity remembered it had a claim on him. He hit the ground hard enough to leave a crater in someone's backfield, and when he tried to stand, his left foreleg buckled. Something was broken. Several somethings. Actually, Duddy lay there in the dirt, waiting for the pain to fade or for someone to find him. He was not sure which he preferred. His scales had been damaged in the landing, and shifting back to his smaller form would be agony with broken bones. So he remained a dragon, a creature the size of a building, bleeding into the soil of a world whose name he did not know. That was how Dorothy found him. She came walking across the field with a lantern, wearing a nightgown and boots, moving with the careful speed of someone whose bones were old but whose spirit refused to slow down. She stopped at the edge of the crater and looked down at him without any of the fear he expected. "Well," she said quietly, "that was quite an entrance." Reth tried to growl, to warn her away, but it came out as more of a wheeze. His ribs were definitely broken. Dorothy climbed down into the crater. Not quickly and not without difficulty, but she came. She set the lantern beside his massive head and studied him with the same expression she might use for a wounded bird. "You are hurt badly," she observed. "Can you understand me?" He managed a small nod, which made his head pound. "Good. I'm going to help you, but you need to stay calm. I know you could burn me to ash, but I'm hoping you will not. My name is Dorothy, and I am too old and too tired to be afraid of dragons." She walked back to her house and returned with blankets, water, and a medical kit that was clearly meant for farm animals. For the next hour, she cleaned his wounds and wrapped his damaged wing as best she could. She spoke the entire time, not about anything important, just small observations about the weather in her garden and how the local store had been out of her favorite tea for 3 weeks. "You do not have to tell me why you are here," she said while bandaging a deep gash along his shoulder. "And you do not have to tell me who you are. But you should know that my barn is empty, and it is warmer than sleeping in a field. I can bring you food and water until you are healed enough to move on." Reth stared at her. This made no sense. She was human, small and fragile, and completely at his mercy. She had no reason to help him, every reason to report him or to be terrified or to demand payment for her damaged field. Instead, she patted his snout like he was a horse and started back toward her house. "I will bring soup in the morning." For now, try to rest. And if you need anything during the night, the house lights stay on. Just make whatever noise you can, and I will hear you." She left him there in the dark, and Reth felt something crack open in his chest that had nothing to do with broken ribs. Over the following days, Dorothy kept her word. She brought him food and water. She changed his bandages and talked to him about simple things. She never asked his name or his purpose, never treated him like a prince or a weapon or a political tool. She treated him like a living being who needed help, and she gave it without asking for anything in return. On the fifth day, when his bones had healed enough to shift, he took his smaller form and walked to her house. She was in the kitchen making bread when he knocked, and she invited him in as if dragons showed up at her door every day. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Dorothy looked at him carefully, taking in his formal bearing and the royal marks that no shifting could hide. "I suspect so," she said. "But I figured that was your business to share, not mine to pry. I am Prince Reth. I left my throne. The guards will come looking. Then we will deal with them when they arrive." She handed him a towel. "For now, can you help me with this dough? My hands are not what they used to be, and kneading takes strength I do not have anymore." Reth took the towel, and for the first time in his long life, he understood what peace felt like. Harris sat at Dorothy's kitchen table and tried to understand how his carefully planned retrieval mission had turned into a dinner party. The table was old wood, scarred from years of use, and covered with a cloth that had been mended several times. Dorothy moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had cooked 10,000 meals and knew exactly where everything belonged. Owen sat across from Harris, looking terrified and confused in equal measure. The other 4 guards had been called inside as well, and they stood in the small living room in full armor, trying to figure out where to put their hands. Reth was still in the kitchen. Harris could hear him asking Dorothy questions about bread temperature and whether the soup needed more salt. The Prince of a Dragon Throne was cooking. Harris filed that information away to process later, when his brain was working properly again. "Now, then," Dorothy said, setting a large pot in the center of the table. "Who wants to say grace?" 6 guards stared at her blankly. "Or we can skip it." "That is fine, too." She began ladling soup into bowls. "I just thought someone might appreciate the opportunity. My husband always said grace before meals. Old habit." Harris found his voice. "Ma'am, I appreciate your hospitality, but we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Prince Reth needs to return to the palace. There are political matters that cannot wait." "I'm sure there are." Dorothy set a bowl in front of him. "But he is not leaving until he finishes eating, and neither are you. When was the last time you had a proper meal, Commander? I do not mean ration packs or station food. I mean a real meal that someone made with care." Harris could not remember. "It might have been months." "That is what I thought." She moved to Owen and placed a bowl before him. "You are too thin, dear. Does your mother know you are not eating right?" Owen's eyes went wide. "My mother?" "Yes, your mother. I assume you have one. You are young enough that she probably still worries herself sick every time you go on mission." Dorothy patted his shoulder. "I had 3 boys of my own. I know how it goes." Something in Owen's face crumbled. Harris saw the young guard's eyes fill with tears, watched him struggle to hold them back and fail. The soup sat steaming in front of him, and Owen stared at it like he had forgotten what food was for. "I have not talked to her in 6 months," Owen whispered. "I keep meaning to send a message, but there's always another duty, another patrol. I keep thinking I will do it tomorrow." "Then you send it tonight," Dorothy said firmly. "After dinner. No more putting it off. She needs to know you are safe, and you need to hear her voice. That is more important than any political crisis." Owen nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Harris felt something tight in his chest. This strange human woman had done in 30 seconds what months of professional counseling had failed to accomplish. She had reminded them they were people, not just soldiers. Dorothy served the rest of the guards and finally sat down herself. "Now eat before it gets cold. And for heaven's sake, take those helmets off. You look like you were expecting an attack in my dining room." Harris removed his helmet. The others followed his lead. It felt strange to sit at a table like this in a civilian home while on an active mission. But it also felt right in a way he could not explain. The soup was simple. Vegetables and broth and bread on the side. Nothing fancy or complicated. but it tasted like care if care had a flavor. Harris realized he was hungry in a way that went beyond his stomach. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Then Dorothy spoke again, her voice gentle. "You boys are here to take him back, and I understand that. You have your orders and your duties. But I need you to understand something first." She set down her spoon. "That boy in my kitchen has been here for 3 weeks. In that time, he has helped me fix my fence, plant the winter crops, and repair my roof. He does not have to do any of that. But he does it anyway, because he is a good person who has been treated like a piece on a game board his whole life." Harris met her eyes. They were sharp despite her age, and they saw far more than he was comfortable with. "You want to know why he ran?" Dorothy continued. "Because running was the only choice he had left. Stay and die slowly from poison and politics, or leave and maybe find something worth living for. He chose life, Commander. Can you honestly blame him? The kingdom needs him," Harris said quietly. "The kingdom needs a lot of things. But what it needs most is a prince who remembers that power is supposed to serve people, not break them." Dorothy picked up her spoon again. "He will go back with you. He knows he has to, but he's going back different than he left, and that is going to scare people who prefer their princes broken and obedient." Reth appeared in the doorway, carrying a basket of bread. He had flour on his shirt and a small smile on his face. "The second batch came out better," he announced. Then he saw his guards sitting at the table, helmets off, eating soup like they were family, and his expression shifted to something Harris had never seen before. "Hope." "Thank you for waiting," Reth said. He set the bread on the table and took the empty seat beside Dorothy. "I know you came a long way." Harris looked at his prince. Really looked at him. The tension that usually lived in Reth's shoulders was gone. His eyes were clear. He looked like someone who had remembered how to breathe. "We can wait a little longer," Harris heard himself say. "Finish your dinner, Your Highness. The galaxy will still be there when we are done." Dorothy smiled and passed the breadbasket. "See, that was not so hard." After the dishes were cleared and the guards had loosened their armor enough to breathe properly, Harris finally asked the question that had been bothering him since they arrived. "Why?" Dorothy was washing plates at the sink, her hands moving in the same steady rhythm they probably had for 60 years. She glanced over her shoulder. "Why what, dear? Why help him? You knew who he was. You could have contacted the palace immediately and received a substantial reward. Instead, you sheltered a fugitive prince and asked for nothing in return." Harris leaned forward. "I've been trying to understand human behavior for 20 years, and I still do not understand this." Dorothy dried her hands and came to sit back at the table. The guards had moved to the living room, giving them space, but Harris knew they were all listening. Even Reth, who sat quietly with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "It is not complicated," Dorothy said. "Someone needed help. I could provide it. That is the whole story. But you are alone here. You have no family, no protection. Sheltering someone being hunted by royal guards put you in danger. Only if the guards were the type to hurt an old woman for showing kindness. And I figured if they were, then I had bigger problems than hiding a prince." She smiled slightly. "Plus, I had a dragon in my barn. That counts for something." Harris shook his head. "You took an enormous risk based on faith that strangers would be reasonable. That is not logical." "No," Dorothy agreed. "It is not. But kindness rarely is." She paused, looking down at her weathered hands. "I lost my husband 15 years ago. Plague swept through the colony, and the medical supplies did not arrive in time. He died holding my hand, apologizing because he was leaving me alone." The room went quiet except for the soft sound of wood settling in the fireplace. "Then my boys," Dorothy continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her words. "All 3 of them within 2 years. 2 to the same plague. 1 to an accident in the fields. By the time I was 60, everyone I loved was gone, and I was living in a house built for a family that did not exist anymore." Reth set down his tea, his expression stricken. "For a long time," Dorothy said, "I thought about leaving, selling the house, moving to one of the core worlds, trying to start over somewhere I would not see their ghosts in every room. But then I realized something. The world had taken everything from me, so I could either let that make me bitter and small, or I could decide that since I had already lost what mattered most, I had nothing left to be afraid of. So you chose kindness, Harris said slowly, understanding dawning. I chose to be the person I needed when I was grieving. I chose to make my home the kind of place where someone running from pain could find rest. She looked at Reth. When you crashed in my field, I saw someone who was hurting in a way that had nothing to do with broken bones. I saw someone who needed exactly what I could give, which was a place to be himself without judgment or expectation. Why would I not help? Because most people would not, Reth said quietly. His voice was rough. Most people see a prince and think about what they can gain. You saw someone suffering and thought about what you could give. That is not normal. Maybe not for princes, Dorothy said. But for humans, that is just being decent. We do not have long lives like dragons. Most of us get 70 or 80 years if we are lucky. We do not have time to waste on being cruel or calculating. Every moment we have is precious, and the only thing that makes life worth living is the connections we make and the kindness we show. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark fields. My husband used to say that hospitality is sacred. That when someone arrives at your door, whether they're a stranger or a friend, or even an enemy, you owe them the basic dignity of food, shelter, and respect. Not because of who they are, but because of who you are. Harris thought about dragon culture, with its rigid hierarchies and complex social rules. Everything was about status and power and maintaining proper distance. The idea of treating everyone equally, regardless of rank, was foreign to them. Revolutionary, even. Your way is dangerous, he said. It assumes people will respond to kindness with kindness. And your way assumes they will not, Dorothy replied. Which becomes true because you expect it. I prefer my version. Owen spoke from the living room, his voice hesitant. My mother is like you. She always took in strays. Animals, neighbors who needed help, anyone who showed up needing something. My father used to joke that she could not turn anyone away. He paused. I have not visited her because I was afraid she would be disappointed in who I became. A soldier. Someone who uses weapons instead of welcome. Dorothy turned to look at him. Oh, honey, she is not disappointed. She is terrified you will forget that before you were a soldier, you were her son. That boy who brought home injured animals and cried at sad stories. He is still in there, and she is desperate for you to remember him. Owen stood abruptly and left the room. Harris heard the front door open and close. Through the window, he saw the young guard walk out into the field, his shoulders shaking. You broke him, one of the other guards said, but there was no accusation in it. Just observation. No, Reth said softly. She reminded him he was human. There's a difference. Dorothy came back to the table and sat down with a tired sigh. I'm not trying to cause problems, Commander. I know you have a job to do, but I need you to understand what you are taking back with you. That boy spent 3 weeks learning that he is allowed to be tired, allowed to want simple things, allowed to exist without justifying every breath he takes. She met Harris's eyes. Do not let them break him again. The kingdom needs a prince, yes, but it needs a prince who remembers what it means to be a person first. Harris nodded slowly. He understood now. This was not about politics or duty. This was about preserving something precious that had almost been destroyed. I will do my best, he promised. Dawn broke cold and clear over Dorothy's small house. Inside, Reth stood in the kitchen he had helped paint last week, staring at his reflection in the window. Behind him, he could hear the guards preparing their ship for the journey back. His escape was over. Reality had caught up. Dorothy appeared beside him, moving quietly despite her age. She held something small in her wrinkled hands. I made you something, she said, offering it to him. To remember, it was a wooden charm, no bigger than his thumb. She had carved it herself, he could tell. The edges were not perfectly smooth, and the shape was simple, but depicted a small house with a wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. Beneath it, she had burned 3 words into the wood, always a place that Reth's throat tightened. Dorothy, I cannot take this. You have already given me so much, which is exactly why you need to take it. She pressed it into his palm and folded his fingers around it. When you're back in that palace, surrounded by people who want to use you or hurt you or turn you into something you are not, I want you to hold this and remember that there is a house on a hillside where someone will always set a plate for you. No questions asked, No price demanded. Just food and rest and a place to be yourself. They're going to try to change me back, Reth said quietly. The council, the advisors, all of them. They will say I was confused or influenced or that I had some kind of breakdown. They will try to make me forget what I learned here. Then do not let them. Dorothy's voice was gentle but firm. You are stronger than you think, Reth. You flew halfway across the galaxy alone. You survived broken bones and a crash landing. You learned to need bread, even though your claws were not made for it. She smiled. If you can do all that, you can certainly stand up to some politicians. What if I fail? What if I go back and slip into the old patterns? What if I forget how to be the person I became here? Then you come back and remember again. The door is always open. She paused. But I do not think you will forget. Pain is a powerful teacher, and so is peace. You know the difference now. That knowledge does not just disappear because it becomes inconvenient. Reth looked down at the charm in his hand. Such a small thing to carry the weight of everything he had learned. But then again, Dorothy herself was small, and she had changed his entire understanding of what strength meant. How do you do it? He asked. How do you keep being kind when the world has taken so much from you? Because the alternative is becoming bitter, and bitter people die inside, long before their hearts stop beating. She touched his arm. I lost my family, yes, but I did not lose my choice of who to be. Every morning I wake up and decide that today I will matter in a good way. That someone, somewhere, will be better because I existed. Some days that means helping a dragon prince. Other days, it just means feeding the birds in my garden. But always means something. Harris appeared in the doorway. Your Highness, we need to leave soon. The council is demanding updates. Reth nodded, but did not move immediately. He looked at Dorothy, trying to memorize her face. The lines around her eyes, the white of her hair, the strength in her small frame. She had saved him in a way that had nothing to do with medicine or shelter. She had reminded him that he was allowed to exist as more than a title. Thank you, he said, and the words felt desperately inadequate. For everything. For not being afraid. For not asking questions. For treating me like a person instead of a prince. You are both, Dorothy said, and the world needs you to remember that. The person makes the prince bearable. Never forget which one matters more. She walked him to the door where the guards were waiting. Owen stood there with red eyes, but a lighter expression. He had spent an hour on a comm call with his mother the night before, and some weight he had been carrying was finally gone. Reth paused at the threshold. His ship waited in the field, engines warming. Beyond that, the palace and all its complications. Assassination attempts. Political maneuvering. The endless pressure to be something he did not want to be. He could turn around right now. Stay here. Let someone else be prince. But Dorothy's words echoed in his mind. Running had taught him what peace felt like. Now he had to learn how to carry that peace back into the chaos. I will come back, he promised, when I can, to help with the garden or fix things around the house. I will keep the soup ready, Dorothy replied, just in case. The guards formed up around him, and together they walked to the ship. Reth looked back once and saw Dorothy standing on her porch, one hand raised in farewell. She looked impossibly small against the morning sky, but he knew better now. Size had nothing to do with strength. He climbed into the ship and strapped himself in. Through the viewport, he watched Dorothy's house grow smaller as they ascended. The vegetable garden, the blue door, the chimney still sending up its thin trail of smoke. It looked like nothing special from this height. Just one small house in a universe of billions. But it was the only place in all that vast space where he had ever felt at home. Harris sat beside him in the cockpit. Are you ready for this, Your Highness? Reth touched the wooden charm in his pocket. Always a place. No, he admitted, but I'm going anyway. That count for something, right? Harris smiled, the first real smile Reth had ever seen on his commander's face. It counts for everything. The ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them back toward the palace and whatever waited there. But Reth was not afraid anymore. He had learned something the council could never take away. He had learned that home was not where you were born. It was where someone saw you, truly saw you, and decided you were worth caring for anyway. And once you knew that feeling existed, you could never pretend you did not deserve it. The galaxy might be harsh, but Dorothy had proved that kindness was real. And if one old woman on a hillside could change a prince's life with nothing but soup and honesty, then maybe he could change a kingdom the same way. Maybe that was what ruling was supposed to be all along. The council chamber had not changed in the 3 weeks Reth was gone. Same cold marble floors. Same towering pillars carved with the names of ancient kings. Same assembly of advisors who looked at him like he was a problem that needed solving rather than a person who needed understanding. High Chancellor Vorn spoke first, his voice dripping with barely concealed irritation. Your Highness, your disappearance caused a diplomatic incident with 3 neighboring kingdoms. Ambassador Krell believes you were making a statement about his trade proposals. The military council thinks you were captured, and the Merchants Guild is demanding answers about what your absence means for the economic treaties you were supposed to sign. Reth stood in the center of the chamber, hands clasped behind his back. In his pocket, Dorothy's wooden charm pressed against his palm. Always a place. I was not captured, he said calmly. I was not making a political statement. I left because I needed to remember who I was before I became who you wanted me to be. The council erupted in whispers. Vorn raised a hand for silence. Your Highness, with respect, you are the crown prince. Personal desires are secondary to duty. No, Reth said. The single word dropped into the chamber like a stone. They are not. The whispers stopped. Everyone stared. For 10 years, Reth continued, I have attended ceremonies I found meaningless. I have smiled at ambassadors who tried to poison me. I have signed treaties that benefited everyone except the people they were supposed to protect. I've been everything you asked me to be, and it was killing me. He pulled the charm from his pocket and held it up. This was carved by an old human woman who sheltered me when I crashed on her world. She fed me. She asked for nothing. She treated me like I mattered because I was alive, not because I wore a crown. And in 3 weeks, she taught me more about leadership than 10 years in this palace ever did. Vorn's expression hardened. Your Highness, you cannot seriously be suggesting we model our governance on the sentiments of a single civilian. Why not? Reth challenged. She understands something we have forgotten. Leadership is not about power. It is about service. It is about making sure that everyone in your care has food, shelter, and dignity. When was the last time anyone in this chamber asked if our people were happy? When was the last time we measured success by anything other than treaties and tax revenue? One of the younger advisors, a dragon named Petra, spoke up hesitantly. The prince has a point. The outer colonies have been requesting aid for months. We keep telling them it is not in the budget, but we somehow found funds for the palace renovation. That is different, Vorn snapped. The palace represents the crown. Its appearance affects diplomatic relations. And the colonists represent our people, Reth shot back. Their survival should matter more than marble floors. He looked around the chamber, meeting eyes that would not hold his gaze. I'm not asking for permission anymore. I'm telling you how things will be. Starting now, we redirect funds from ceremonial projects to colony aid. We simplify the bureaucracy so people can get help without filling out 50 forms. And we make it clear that anyone serving in this government is here to serve our people, not their own ambitions. You cannot just change everything, Vorn protested. There are procedures, traditions. Then we change those too. Reth's voice was steel wrapped in calm. Because if traditions matter more than people, then our traditions are worthless. The chamber fell silent. Then, slowly, Petra began to clap. It started as a single sound, but grew as other younger advisors joined. Not everyone, not even half, but enough to make it clear that something had shifted. Harris, standing at the chamber door, smile point 3 months later, Reth hosted his first state dinner under the new rules. Instead of servants carrying plates while dignitaries sat and judged, Reth walked through the hall with trays of food, serving each guest himself. The ambassadors were scandalized. The press called it undignified. But the palace staff wept when their prince bent down to ask an elderly cook if the weight of the trays was too heavy, if she needed help, if she was being treated well. He implemented the colonist aid program personally, cutting through the bureaucracy that had strangled previous attempts. Food and medical supplies reached the outer territories within weeks instead of months. When challenged about costs, he sold 3 of the ceremonial crowns that had been sitting in storage for centuries. They were symbols, he said. People needed more than symbols. Not everyone approved. Vorn resigned in protest. 2 ambassadors withdrew from treaty negotiations, calling Reth's behavior beneath his station. But for every diplomat who left, 3 colonists sent messages of gratitude. For every advisor who quit, 2 younger replacements stepped forward with ideas for reform. Owen returned to his homeworld and brought his mother to meet Reth. She was small, weathered, and when Reth thanked her for raising a man of honor, she hugged him like he was one of her own sons. Owen cried again, but this time from happiness that on the 6-month anniversary of his return, Reth received a package from the outer colonies. Inside was a jar of preserved vegetables and a note in Dorothy's careful handwriting. Your garden is doing well. The fence you built is still standing. Come visit when the politics get too heavy. The soup pot is always on. Reth stood on his balcony, the same balcony he had fled from half a year ago, and looked out at the kingdom he was learning to serve properly. It was harder than running. Some days it felt impossible. The old guard fought him constantly. Change came slowly, and every step forward felt like a battle, but he was not alone anymore. He had guards who saw him as a person, advisors who believed in reform, and somewhere on a hillside, an old woman who proved that kindness could change the world if you were brave enough to practice it. Reth touched the wooden charm he wore on a chain around his neck now. Always a place. Thank you, Dorothy, he whispered to the wind, for teaching me that the greatest power is knowing when to be gentle. Below, in the city, lights began to glow as evening settled. Each one represented a life, a person who depended on him to lead with wisdom and care. He would not be perfect. He would make mistakes. But he would never forget that before he was a prince, he was a person who had been shown mercy when he needed it most. And that made all the difference.